Well, I want to do a short preface because it may seem that I'm being unduly harsh or I'm being polemical, but no, this is the calm version because the first 3 times I listened to it, it was pretty awful. And this garbage video is pretty worthless, but this is a subject people have asked about. It is a worthy topic. It's not being handled with any degree of seriousness or any actual intellectual consistency, but it is an issue. So, just some guy, one of the lower ranked YouTube grifters, is going to try to foist the charge of racism, not on the alt right, which he belongs to, but on Amazon. It's a pretty interesting performance, so let's hear him out on the alleged canonical issues with, well, black people.
I know there's going to be some Wakandans getting pissy about this, so allow me to elf-splain. The elves arose in Kuivianen before there was a sun or a moon. The two trees had been created in Amon, but their light didn't reach past the Undying Lands, so the rest of Arda existed under starlight. This is why the elves love the stars. Now this part is key. The thing about the elves is that they don't age, don't get sick, and aren't affected by weather the same way as men are. What that means is that they're unlikely to tan, because tanning is a skin's defense against the damaging rays of the sun, and the elves would either heal too quickly or be utterly unaffected. This is important because the way you get darker skin is typically by constant exposure to intense sunlight over many generations.
I don't even know where to begin with this. I think he seems to think twilight equals darkness. Now, to be fair, in the text, it does seem to imply that, and Tolkien does write about darkness. Well, you have to say both that you're wrong and he's wrong. Twilight does mean sunlight. Twilight just means a certain amount of sunlight of less intensity. It's just light we get besides the sun. So we do get sunlight even in twilight. And that's important because he's hanging a whole lot on the sun.
The elves are described as having fair or olive skin. If the elves can't tan, they're not going to develop more melanin in their skin, meaning there would be no dark-skinned elves. Of course, for the bulk of their existence, there is no sun. They lived under starlight until the bravest of them accepted the call to go to Valinor. There's no reason to assume the light of the trees would have harmed the elves in any way, so those elves would have remained fair-skinned. Obviously, the elves who remained in Middle-earth wouldn't tan under starlight, and they wouldn't do so once the sun was created.
Well, it may shock him, but actually, scientifically, legitimately, this has been brought into question. Because we know for a fact, when we go to Africa, we do encounter incredibly light skinned Africans who come from very dark skinned families. And this seems like a radical puzzle. Because, again, we did, and he doesn't seem to know this apparently, we all did come from dark ancestors. So why is sometimes white skin so prevalent? What happened, given the short amount of time span in terms of evolution? And the answer may be certain kinds of proteins, certain kind of genes internal to us created the prevalence of light skin. It is not, in fact, from the sun. The sun may be a factor, but it's not the factor. And this gets to the heart of the problem. This person has not seriously done any work on Tolkien, done no serious work on biology, done no serious work on Darwinism, done no serious work on philosophy of biology, philosophy of physics. Now, I want to be clear, I still need to study these subjects with a lot more rigor myself. However, I do know enough to tell you this. Darwinism is not a legitimate scientific theory. Even people who are diehard Darwinists admit this. It's not really a fleshed out full theory. So you leaning on it for support shows you don't know the state of the literature. The state of the literature is still, it's a theory in progress. So to draw in all this neo-Nazi nonsense into Tolkien on the basis of a theory that does not even have validity at this point is beyond stupid. It just shows your insane ignorance of the sciences and histories of the world, much less these particular subjects of genetics and population statistics and demography.
In fact, by the time the One Ring is forged, there has only been a sun and moon for 2,100 years. There's also another point. The elves don't have many children. Usually they have a couple, literally one or two. Since they have so few offspring, they aren't likely to evolve quickly. There simply wouldn't be any way there would be dark-skinned elves unless they were like that from the beginning, and given what I just laid out, there's no way different branches of elves could all be fair or olive-skinned if their forebears were dark-skinned. This just couldn't happen. It makes even less sense considering that Arondir appears to be from the Undying Lands. He's asked by enough what he did back in Valinor, meaning that he would be one of the Noldor who came back to Middle-earth, and the Noldor are described as fair-skinned and dark-haired. So in the lore, it makes zero sense that Arondir is dark-skinned.
Well, let me concede there may be something iffy with the Noldor. I would grant we don't want to disturb the mythology unduly, so perhaps there are some issues with the way they're presenting the Noldor. That may be true, but even following your insane bat theory, apparently you don't seem to understand how lighting works, because, as he cleverly concedes, some elves could be olive-skinned. But wait a minute, you just said they need the sun, and for a long time they didn't have the sun. So how do they have olive skin? So there's an internal inconsistency. And now I'm not going to get to that because he is sort of trying to save Peter Jackson. And I'm not going to get to that either. I will do a follow-up video when I can. So he basically is sort of conceding the point. No, there are elves with darker skin, but they can't be this dark. Well, apparently you haven't even done basic research. If you actually did research on this particular actor, you'd know he's not black. He's Hispanic. And the reason he may be lit a certain way is because he's lit a certain way. In various photos, he has much lighter skin. He is not as dark-skinned as you're making him out to be, even in your own presentation. It could be for certain shots, he looks dark-skinned. That doesn't mean he is dark-skinned. So even following your own neo-Nazi nonsense to its absolute conclusion, it could be it's the way someone is framed with lighting due to cinematography, not due to the inherent genetics of Middle-earth.
And this is a fundamental flaw of the show. So much of what happens makes no sense in context to the lore. So much of it is made up that you really have to ask why the showrunners didn't just make their own story. If you weren't going to follow what Tolkien wrote, if you were so keen on having a multi-ethnic cast, why not create a new story that would allow you to shape the world as you want it instead of trying to twist Tolkien's obviously European-influenced story into some third-rate Benetton? Anyway.
Well, we'll agree with the anyway, because anyway, you don't know anything. You provided zero, and I mean zero textual support. I don't even know which text you're referring to. I assume the Silmarillion, but I don't know. You'd never specify any specific passages. We're just going with very generalized things from the canon. So it seems you have read the books, but you're not giving us specific passages. We're just going, well, maybe, it's likely, the trees can't hurt people. Come on, brother, the sun power to give you the dark skin-o. That's not how science works, that's not how logic works, and that's not how Tolkien works. I can cite very easily tons, and I do mean tons of documentation showing Tolkien was not a racist, he hated racism, he had no love for Darwinism, he was a dedicated Catholic, he was a dedicated Christian. There is very little evidence he took modern evolutionary theory that seriously to this degree. We also have evidence he explicitly answered these points at specific questions, namely he didn't want the scientification of his mythology. He said this explicitly, he said this directly. And on these other various points, he also provided answers which you nowhere cite. He was a dedicated Catholic, he was a dedicated Christian. He didn't ignore science, but science is not the heart of this mythology. You yourself say, well, in thousands of years you can't get dark skin elf. In thousands of years, you can't even get amoeba. You can't even get frogs. You can't even get the beginnings of life. Life takes billions and billions of years to even evolve. Clearly, this is not a scientific mythology. It's not Dune. You know this, and I know this. So what was the point of this Hitlerite idiocy? I don't see any except for the short-term benefits and gains of profiting off a famous name. Your metaphysics is ridiculous. Your scientific theory is non-existent. Your textual support, as far as I can see, is lacking, and your internal coherence is shot to hell. Because even under your own understanding of idiocy, it could be there's internal genetic factors to answer the darkness of the skin of this or that person. You've nowhere pointed to an actual canonical violation. But I will say, out of the dog shit 20 points you raised, maybe the Noldor is perhaps a legitimate point. But it comes down to the famous 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals nothing. You provided nothing in terms of guidance on this question. All you did was dress up a lot of fancy words, but you provided no evidence, no citation of scientific articles, no citation of specific passages, no citation of the letters of Tolkien, memoirs, or interviews where he answered these questions. And you know it and I know it. He did not give answers that would be pleasing to you. So I can say this video is pretty much worthless.
Triple changes. They told You are either lying or you're stupid!